It was the seemingly typical thunderstorm that rapidly escalated into a disaster event. When dark clouds gathered over Melbourne, Australia, late on Monday local time, Victoria's emergency services braced for reports of damage and possible injury. Instead, the storm brought something far worse, a rare phenomenon called thunderstorm asthma that stretched paramedics and hospitals to their limits. So how did it catch everyone by surprise? Unprecedented level of calls. Ambulance Victoria received more than 1,870 calls between 1800 hours, 7 o'clock GMT, and 2300 hours on Monday, a number more than 6 times the daily average. The massive increase affected waiting times and forced 60 reserve ambulances, police and firefighters to respond to medical emergencies. "It was an extraordinarily busy, it was unprecedented," said Mick Stevenson, Ambulance Victoria's Executive Director of Emergency Operations. He said about 200 calls were directly linked to asthma, but 600 more reported respiratory issues. "What we do know is that a lot of people who called last night had never had asthma before, so this was their first experience," he said. Image copyright Matthew Wu. Image caption Paramedics were flooded with calls after 1800 hours local time. Local media reported the storm had been linked to 2 deaths, including one patient who was forced to wait 30 minutes for an ambulance. "We'll review each of them and we'll know in the fullness of time whether they're related to this particular incident," Mr. Stevenson said. 30 minutes is a long time to wait for an ambulance when you're very sick. We would not like people to wait that long. Victorian Health Minister Jill Hennessy said the challenging conditions forced private hospitals to open to the public. "No doubt there will be lessons to learn. But every part of our emergency management surge occurred correctly," she said. What is thunderstorm asthma? Melbourne's thunderstorm asthma event was caused by extreme levels of ryegrass pollen in the air whipped up by strong winds. About 1 in 10 people have asthma in Australia, with about 80% of those sufferers experiencing allergies, particularly to rye pollen. When saturated in rain, the pollen breaks down into smaller particles which become easier to inhale and trigger an asthma attack. A person who has an allergic response to that particular pollen, because it's so small, it will get into the lungs, Asthma Victoria Chief Robin told the BBC. He said Monday's rye particle count of 102 was more than double what would be considered high on a normal day. Image copyright thinks tech image caption pollen from ryegrass is being blamed for triggering asthma attacks. Melbourne's current spring season has been particularly wet, creating havoc for asthma and hay fever sufferers. It's quite rare and we've seen 2 incidents of this kind this century in Melbourne, Mr. Lill said. It's the southeast corner of Australia that has this high humidity, high thunderstorm activity at this time of the year. But he said the scale of Monday's emergency could not have been predicted. The key message of this event is that if you have asthma, you should be using your preventative medication as described, he said.